Hello everyone, welcome to the introduction about ego development theory. I wanted to make this sort of series of videos for quite a while since I've read the research on it. So this episode is going to be about ego development theory, an introduction to the tenets and some basic rules of how the model works, how um, the stages evolve, and these sort of principles, basic principles of ego development theory. First of all, what is ego? What is this ego's development, and why is there a theory made about it? We're going to cover all of this in this video, so stay tuned. This is based on research by Dr. Susanne Krug-Greuter. She's a researcher that has spent 35 years collecting data for this study. I think it is greatly appreciated, the effort that she put in, and this is why I think it should be shared, as it is one of the, I have to say, it had quite an impact on me when I read this paper. So, ego development theory is a theory about the unfolding of human potential. So, how humans evolve throughout their lives in a logical sequence of stages. Or you might also call them worldviews that kind of expand from early childhood, from birth basically, to adulthood and further. Um, these worldviews evolve from very simple ones to quite complex, from static ones to dynamic ones, from egocentric to sociocentric to actually world-centric views. Now, as it is a logical sequence of stages, you can imagine that to get to a later stage, you would need to pass through the earlier stages. Now, the earlier stages are becoming part of the repertoire of the individual, and the later stage that the individual is at is kind of a primary lens through which the individual looks and experiences the world around him. These sort of stages have an influence on uh, everything, basically. So, how an individual can describe, articulate concepts, how they can cultivate certain behaviors, and how they change. So, everything is kind of included, which is why I think it is a very important video to watch before getting into the stages, which we are going to do in another episode of this series that I want to do. Now, with healthy development of these stages, the individual's autonomy, freedom, flexibility, and self-awareness, even the skill in interacting with the world around, they're all increasing. So there's also something that decreases, which is defenses, which I think is quite interesting, because you would not have guessed that a later stage has much less defenses, but kind of makes sense when you'll go through the stages. You'll see. But of course, there can exist derailments, sort of these pockets of lack of integration, trauma, psychopathology. There can exist at any stage. So, with that being said, later stages are not necessarily more adjusted or happier than earlier stages. As it is a logical progression, um, people move through the earlier stages, right, to get to a later one. So this is described in the research as, for example, a baby learning how to walk and then learning how to run. But learning how to run does not, you don't forget how to walk in order to learn how to run. It's an addition on top of. So this is how the stages kind of are. They're added one on top of the other. And while going through the stages, if you are in a later stage, you can see the earlier stages and you can understand their perspective and their views on the world, and it is familiar to you. While looking up at a later stage is actually impossible. You would not understand it and you would find it weird and unintelligible. What is really interesting about a thing that is mentioned here in the research that I found quite amazing is that no matter how much we evolve and how much knowledge we gather and understanding, it will always be partial and incomplete about the world. So we can not know, we can never know everything. So I think that's in a way very calming, kind of gives you this calming feeling that you cannot know everything. So just do your best and it'll be fine. This sort of development, this development through the stages occurs through interplay between the individual, the person, and the environment around him or her. So this development has to have several good things that must happen in order for it to occur. So the person has to be in a good place so that they can and want to evolve. The environment has to also be, let's say, conductive for that sort of change to happen. But also, person like this needs some support, appropriate support, and also challenges to overcome in order for this for this evolution to happen. And this sort of thing cannot be forced. If someone does not want to move, to evolve, to grow into a later stage, basically, then they won't. And every person has the right to be whoever they are in this moment in their life. So don't feel the need to push this sort of evolution on people. And yeah, it is just better to understand and let it be. It'll happen if they want, of course. Now, all these stages give a different level of self-expression, and the later ones are more unique in that the self-expression is more unique, and if a person is at a later stage, it is the center of gravity, which we'll talk about just in a little bit, is a little bit hard to determine. All the stages, however, are idealizations. So they are not, nobody fits these stages entirely. You can look at them as a doctor makes a diagnosis, right? There are several symptoms, for example, that can happen for a person that don't happen for another person. So it is kind of a list, and you don't have to have 100%. Nobody has 100%. Nobody is 100% at one stage in their life. Actually, the distribution is described as being at least 3 stages, but more often 4 or 5 stages on this theory. Now, there are some depictions of how it looks. However, I think it's helpful to explore some aspects of the theory itself, but I have to it comes with a warning, right? It has these abstractions, these depictions have their limitations. So um, yeah, don't take them as set in stone. Um, there are 9 levels of development. 2 are pre-conventional, 3 conventional ones, 3 more that are post-conventional, and 1 which is kind of a catch-all for all the rest, which is called ego transcendent or post-conventional. And another thing that's interesting is that how the direction of development can happen, and it can happen on basically two directions, right? One is horizontal. So as you see, it's sort of a spiral, right? So as you see the spiral, the earlier stages have these sort of discs, right, are represented by discs. And those discs represent the skills, the information, the knowledge that exists at every stage. And as you can see, the wider the stage, right? The later the stage, the disc is larger. So there's more information, more knowledge, more skills that are involved in that stage. So this is horizontal development. Vertical can also happen. One way it can happen is up, right? You can move up a stage, which is a sort of a transformation, a growth, and developing a new perspective on things. But also down movement can also happen. But for down movement, the conditions have to be quite specific. It can be temporarily or permanently a permanent move into a lower stage due to some circumstances that are in the environment, or perhaps stress or disease that might come over a person. Yeah, so movement can happen also down the spiral, but usually moving up is what we're looking at. So with the vertical moving up, I think that's the most fascinating one. And when you think that this sort of ego development theory is kind of a theory of meaning making, so it's what meaning you give to something new. Basically, the whole system restructures with every stage, restructures and gives new meaning to things, which you can imagine, considering how many things exist in a person's life, can take quite a while. So it is said that with intervention, right, if an individual puts time and effort into perhaps getting coached by someone, they can move in 1 year or 2 years through one stage, and all the intervention material has to be targeted 1 or 2 stages above the stage that the individual is currently at. But usually it takes at least 5 years for someone to move to a new level, sometimes even more, last 10 years more. There are people who are stuck at a stage in their lives for their whole lives, basically, because the conditions aren't right, or the person doesn't want to move on, or and why? Because the ego has certain strategies for coping and for defending itself, basically. And one of them, which I found the most interesting, is called selective inattention. It's talked about in the paper, which is basically the fact that when someone talks about concepts that are too advanced, for example, that you can't quite comprehend, you kind of ignore the things that you can't, and you just take the information that you can, and yeah, that kind of makes you feel more grounded. And that's another thing, that the ego becomes, the more threat uh, comes towards the ego, the more rigid, more rooted, more crystallized it becomes in the beliefs that it has, uh, in the specific stage that it is. Like the saying is, the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. So even if the situation that the person is in is a toxic one, is not really a good situation, they will say, yes, but I don't want to move on because I know this. This is where we've been, and I know how to. I feel kind of, I'm settled in. I don't want to move on to something new, to into the unknown, because I don't know what's there. So why should I? Maybe I should just stay here where I know what I'm doing and I'm safe, right? But as Albert Einstein famously said, a problem cannot be solved at the same level as it was created. So some problems you need to grow in order to solve them. And the later stages, like I said, have less defensive maneuvers they can apply. But I think that's also more with the increase of self-awareness, which makes you kind of see these sort of mechanisms as they pop up in your ego, and as you can kind of preemptively understand what's happening and do things to to prevent that. As we were talking about the unknown, um, one other thing is mentioned in the paper, which is the correlation between suffering and growth, which is quite interesting in a way. The argument here is that basically to grow, suffering is kind of a part of it, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of it when we think about growth, because growth means going into the unknown, doing something that you haven't done before. And these sort of experiences can cause you discomfort, pain, of course, a lot of uncertainty, losses, right? Like if you move to another company, right? If you change jobs, of course, you have this sort of feeling of, am I doing the right thing? Should I quit? Should I stay in the position that I'm in now? Because if you leave, you'll lose your job that you have currently, and you'll go into the unknown, which, I mean, you don't know what's there. Could be very discomforting, very uncertain. So you can also lose that job if you don't like it, or if the environment is not right. So there's a lot of potential loss, potential discomfort that you think about, and this kind of, it's a little bit of suffering, but sometimes it's required in order for us to grow and to move forward. Now I want to talk a little bit about a central concept in ego development theory, which is language. Language is very important to the theory, as the understanding of different concepts while moving through the stages. This understanding of different concepts changes, and the way that you articulate them, the way that you describe them, changes as well, For example, your concept of truth can be very different from one stage to the other. What is truth? What is love? What is integrity? What is power? So all of these concepts change throughout the stages. For example, think about yourself 5 years ago, 10 years ago. What did you think power was? When did you feel powerful? What did you need to have? What is it now? I think it's a very interesting thought exercise that you can do. Now, the ego, finally getting to the ego, is, what is it? What is ego? It's basically the system by which we interpret and make coherent sense of our experience. We make meaning of everything around us. So we can look at it, for example, from a computer point of view, from a very IT kind of point of view. It is kind of like the processing unit, right? That interprets and gives meaning to things that are happening. If we look at it from a human point of view, it can also be some sort of storyteller, right? We take information and then the ego kind of puts it together and makes a coherent story about what's happening. Our senses, our ideas, everything. Now, the fact that you know about something doesn't really mean you integrate it, right? So this phenomenon is also tackled in the research, and it's called aboutism. So for example, when someone can read in a book, right, about entrepreneurship, or you watch a video, and it says, oh, there's plenty of risks, and you have this feeling of uncertainty, and you haven't been an entrepreneur until one of your business fails, and something like that, right? And you listen and you comprehend these things, but you know about them, but they are not integrated until you actually go through the experience of doing this. So this is the difference between knowing and integrating an experience, basically. So in the next videos, I'm going to talk about the stages. I'm going to go through them in detail. For each stage, we have three major components that we'll tackle. The first one is operative, more the doing kind of, how does the person behave, what do they do, and the sort of more operative side. Second one is affective. How do they experience their emotions, and how do they experience things around them? And it's more related to being than doing. And the third one is cognitive. So what do they think about? How do they reason? How do they do research? How do they tackle unknown problems from a cognitive point of view? So all of these three will go through all the stages, through these three components, which will give you, I think, a very comprehensive view of them. So in the spiral, as you can see, there's a progression, right? It's sort of a ever widening of the spiral, but there's also an alternating progression. As you see, it moves from left to right, between integration and differentiation, between embeddedness and separation. So in this figure here, you see that stages 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, are integration kind of stages. So they are the type of where the person wants to integrate with someone, with a group, with an organization that is made of either, well, first you'll see that is like-minded persons to like-spirited persons, something like that. And the other stages, which are looking like fractions, right? 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6. They're all stages of differentiation where the person wants to differentiate themselves from the group by uh, by showing new information, new discoveries, and gathering these sort of information and being a more, let's say, growing more as an individual. These sort of these stages are distributed in a bell-like curve, right? So the ones in the middle of the spiral are much more frequently experienced by everyone around the world. You can actually find in the paper, which I will link down below, you can find a distribution of percentages of people across several populations. So that is, I think, also a good data point to check out. So the later stages and earlier stages, when we're talking about adulthood, of course, are much less frequently seen. And later stages are not necessarily better than earlier stages. It's just a matter of optimal fit. So this kind of covers the basics. If you want to learn more about the stages, stay tuned. I will post all the stages in episodes in the following weeks and go in detail through all of them. Let me know what you found most interesting about this theory up until this point, of course. And yeah, like, subscribe, share, all that jazz that the YouTube algorithm really loves. If you found this interesting, if you found this a little bit enlightening, and yeah, let's see you in the next one. All the best.